does seem to be a strategic piece, which is if you put Russia in a meat grinder, the Russia-China Defense Pact has a harder time operating because the Russians are tied down in Ukraine. And they may not have the either energy or military resources to redevote to helping China with its defensive strategy in Southeast Asia. Having said that, I mean, like, I have been on this kind of train for the last several years, which is we need a bigger U.S. Navy. We need a bigger U.S. Navy. We need more ships. We need more people. China's going to be a 400 ship Navy in 2039 or 2040. And while it takes time to gain the expertise to become a blue water Navy and become proficient at it, the inability of the American public or the American government to adequately recognize that we need to bulk up our Navy is a problem. We also have to deal with the Jones Act, which requires a lot of stuff to be manufactured domestically, a lot of ships to be manufactured domestically, which I think having a domestic manufacturing base is really important. But in the short term, why don't we look at like buying destroyers from South Korea or Japan? They make fairly decent destroyers, as I understand it, and that would help us push off some space in which to get our domestic manufacturing house back in order. Because at least as I understand it, the Navy is supposed to get something like 15 ships a year, and they'll only be getting 5. So for folks who don't understand why I'm focusing on the U.S. Navy, from San Diego to Seoul, South Korea is 6,000 miles. From San Diego to Diego Garcia, which goes through the South China Sea into Indonesia and the Malacca Straits, and then out into the Indian Ocean to Diego Garcia, U.S. Naval Base, is 11,000 miles. So we can't be on the other side of the world at the snap of a finger. We have to be able to forward deploy, and forward deploying means we have to be able to put ships out there, and it doesn't really help if we're putting ships out past their service time or what they should normally be out in the water on before they come back to the port and get the needed repairs. That's why I'm really focused on the Navy in that way, because it's such a long distance that you can't do anything without an adequately functioning Navy. And I think we do still largely have an adequately functioning Navy, but the inability to get those ships when we need them is a severe problem for the United States.
Okay, I have a question for you, Marshall.
Yes, please, go ahead.
So I know you essentially compared Russia as basically a two-tier problem comparatively to China being our closest competitor that we need to be more concerned with, but don't you think that, like, if we stand back and we cede to Russia keeping the land that they're currently occupying, doesn't that give them, like, control of all of those resources over there and the Black Sea control as well? I mean, wouldn't that be bound to shift things for them if we just, negotiated to give them the land that they're occupying right now?
I mean, look, I worry that giving them the land will only embolden Vladimir Putin's want to roll into the rest of Eastern Europe and put the USSR back together.
Right.
However, having said that, we have to take what is principle and important against what we can practically do. My ranking of China ahead of Russia comes from the National Defense Estimate, which is something put together by our defense community and the different multilateral intelligence agencies. And one of the things that allowed China to bump up as quick as it has, for example, was us being tied down in the quagmire of Iraq. Right? That allowed us to focus our attention on the Middle East, while China focused their attention on Africa and doing trade there and doing debt swap deals in which they'll build you ports and roads, but if you can't pay back for it, the Chinese government then owns it. So while I do think there's an imperative to tell Vladimir Putin, no, you can't have this stuff, China's always going to come in the number 1 position in the defense estimate, and Russia's always going to come in the number 2 position. Or at least it's been that way for most of my lifetime, I should say. parts of Ukraine, I would do that. But as Anson, I think, has properly pointed out, the ability to have anything other than a meat grinder in Ukraine is dependent upon putting troops on the ground to fight the Russians. And if the Europeans get involved fighting the Russians on the ground, it could draw the United States into that, which is, as I said earlier, nobody in the United States wants to go to war again. They're just not interested. And also, if the Europeans want to get involved that way, I don't necessarily see a problem with the Europeans doing the European thing, right? Like, it's territory that's closer to them than it is to us. But if the United States were to get involved and have to put, the 82nd Airborne on the ground in Ukraine, we would get tied down in a way that would not allow us to then turn our attention to our first near-peer competitor. Essentially, we're in between this idea that ideologically we might want not one more inch. Practically, we don't have the resources or the public support to ensure that, right? We have the public support to ensure build-up there for the U.S. Navy to confront China, but we don't have a popular idea that submitting U.S. troops on the ground would be a good idea. So I think in answer to your question, as much as I would like to stop from giving one more inch, I think the best we're going to get out of this is some sort of a meat grinder like Korea. And it's still within U.S. national interest to have the Russians grind themselves up in the meat grinder, right? But it may not be within our national interest right away to help put troops on the ground or to spend, 1/9 of the defense budget on the Ukraine war. I say all of that because the defense estimates rank our most important adversary as China, and as I said, Russia always comes in as a number 2 in the modern world. So I always tend to go for practical over ideological, because that's the real world. If we let ourselves live by our ideology, then we're going to be pursuing things in a way that is hopeful but not practical, right?
Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you.
Yeah, hopefully that helps.
So, I just wanted to chime in on something you said, Marshall. Ordering ships from Korea, I'll let Captain speak to that a little bit because he knows more about the subs and some of those. But you would never pay someone like me to go on a Korean-made destroyer. The best that they can produce with our Aegis class weapon systems is probably comparable to the Arleigh Burke class destroyers that we have. And most of the world kind of falls either just beneath that or on par with them. They're nowhere near us in world-class destroyers. As a destroyer man myself, I love my little boats. I think they're fantastic. However, scaling up to, like, say, 5 destroyers every couple of years from Korea, South Korea, would severely impact their resources. They wouldn't be able to meet the demands right off the bat. Secondly, when we talk about shipbuilding, U.S. Navy ships, just to give you a record, we test them. We actually do explosives. We run them through the gap. Like, you have to have shockproof pumps from impacts. Think the USS Cole, for instance, had a hole in its side and it still stayed afloat. Our ships are designed in such a way to actually absorb impacts or take an impact and still function. It takes a lot to sink a U.S. Navy ship. Korea does make a good boat. However, they're not comparable to ours. They're about 10% larger in capacity, the last records that I looked at. But it's a little bit bigger in certain areas. Some designs are nice, but it's more of a commercial marketing rather than a tactical or actual nautical marketing. Our ships have a lot of other things that we adapt that came from us, like most specifically World War II. We learned a lot in shipbuilding in terms of making our ships. Now, we've made mistakes trying to do more advances than other things, but I would not say that Korea could supplant a U.S. Navy ship. Also, not to mention the fact that China would take drones. Watch that. That's a little bit too close to home. You'd have Russia doing the same
about Friday night after Trump and Putin have their session. Would it be in the best interest of the United States and NATO and Ukraine if Putin refuses to give an inch and Trump recognizes that, he walks out of the room and says, we're going to keep fighting, but we're going to keep fighting with the U.S. providing arms to Europe, which Europe buys and then gives to Ukraine. We're going to continue the meat grinder, and we're going to wait and see which side wears down faster and sues for unilateral peace, maybe not unconditional surrender, but which side is going to surrender first. Is that the best it could come out of this session with Putin this coming Friday?
If I could jump in, is it the best scenario? No, right? Is it the most likely and the most probable? Yeah. Unless, as I mentioned before,
what is the best scenario, Rob?
the best scenario is they find a way to make a deal and cut it out, right? The best scenario is they find a way, Donald Trump understanding, for lack of a better term, the strongman ethos, right? Let me give you cover to save face in front of your people. Not that he necessarily cares, but Putin cares about his image. He, as Frank mentioned in the chat, he controls the narrative that the Russian people will get, and he doesn't care, right? He doesn't care about that. He does care about his image. So if he has cover to lack of a better term, to retreat, right, and still call it a win, he'll take it, right? And Ukraine could say the same thing, right? Ukraine, I believe, just wants the war to stop and leave us alone, that kind of situation. But Russia needs to save face. That's the best scenario to come out of this meeting. That's the best scenario. Is it the most likely? No, but it is the best.
But you agree that Ukraine has to cede significant land to Russia in order to achieve that outcome this Friday, right?
From a pragmatic perspective, they have to give up something. Yeah, they have to give Russia a reason to want to say, "I'll stop." Right? I don't think that he will. I don't think he's not incentivized to do so. The only incentive for Zelensky to do that is if the United States, vis-a-vis NATO, says we're done. We don't have the capacity anymore. We can't. I'm not going to do it. Right? If the United States says that, then Ukraine doesn't have the prerogative, and they'll try to cut the best deal that they can, even if that means giving up some land. But if the United States stays in it, stays funding NATO, stays giving intelligence, stays giving weapons and money and things like that, we can last as long as the United States can last, which we assume to be forever, right? And Russia's going to say, well, I'm going to stay in it too, you know. That's also a very real possibility. I defer to Marshall. He's a little smarter than me in these kinds of things, but from my experience, the most probable scenario is that it just keeps going on. I think the most probable scenario is nothing changes. They had a good fucking talk. They had something to eat, and it stays the same. I think that's the most probable, unfortunately.
Are you asking like how to win while getting a peace at some point, Captain?
No, I'm not. I'm basically going to rely on your position that Russia's losing the war faster than Ukraine is, and we keep the pressure on through current sanctions, more sanctions, continuing to resupply Ukraine vis-a-vis Europe so it doesn't cost us any money. In other words, is that the best way to go in the best interest of the United States this coming weekend? Do you think it is? I think that was your position, that Putin's going to lose this faster than Ukraine is, so let's keep the pressure on and let's wait and see what happens in the future, right?
That's only if U.S. and European forces, NATO overall, and maybe India agreement to supply Ukraine. India is going to stay in the middle road. They don't want any part of it. South Korea has been supplying their weapons. NATO is like it's just a whole mess there, sir. So I would say unless Trump is going to lead the front, and again, we're right back at square one where we're going to do funding, and it depends on how fast that aid would get to Ukraine. I think if you dropped massive amounts of aid, and I mean military weapons to Ukraine, could they rally and actually push Russia? Most likely, most definitely. If you gave them the right systems, you gave them the right air support, and the U.S. said, you know what, hell with this, we're just going to put a blockade in the Black Sea. Good luck, Russia. Let's see what you got. And did a combined NATO force in there, and then actually sanctions the shit out of Russia, sir, I think you'd have a winning strategy. Also, if I was Zelensky, I would be funneling, low-tiered explosives, weapons to the centers in Russia, saying, blow up spaces. Some of you may not like that. I would orchestrate that. I would say, this is for my nation. I'm going to hit your hard spots. I'm going to get the people so upset with you that they're going to say, hey, we need to stop this, and I'm going to hit soft targets, and I'm going to hit areas where it'll have economic impact as well as optics impact. I'm one that says the rules of war can be changed. I would also say, if everybody was serious about it, Putin is this evil guy. Well, if I was Zelensky, I would probably try to orchestrate a team to assassinate him. I would just do that. I mean, what are they going to do? Hold him as a war criminal? No one's called for that yet. I mean, some Republicans will, some MAGA types will, some on the left will, but no one's going to really do anything against Zelensky.
So again, summarizing, if I may, Brad says keep fighting, and keep fighting harder than the current status quo. And the only thing I would suggest that is a problem with that is if we stay in the position of we're continuing to use our military-industrial complex to provide the bulk of the material to sell to Ukraine, I don't think our military-industrial complex at this point can keep up with the war. I think that we are scraping the bottom of the barrel to produce enough weapons right now just to keep Ukraine supplied. Can we fight harder from the United States, not by putting boots on the ground, but by giving them better and more weapons? I think that's going to be a huge challenge, and it's going to be a very expensive one.
May I ask a sort of an elementary question?
Sure, go ahead.
Do we know why we're supporting Ukraine and say that the U.S. and European partners, allies, are supporting Ukraine? Do we understand why we're doing that?
I think we do. We're supporting them because Vladimir Putin has decided to break the agreement post-World War II, which is that countries don't wantonly take other countries' land, despite the fact that Putin considers it a buffer zone.
Okay, so we're funding a war to enforce rules or guidelines.
I believe that the United States has been doing this based on moral principles that, since World War II, if you invade another country, that's wrong, and you're not going to get any land in doing so. And that's the moral position that the United States has taken. I agree with that position, by the way, but we're certainly unable to enforce it in Ukraine for the last 4 years. Actually 10 years if you start back in 2014.
Yeah, well, I think that's noble. I think oftentimes wars aren't over morality.
He doesn't have anybody
Perhaps more often
anymore
they're over
like he had the
resources.
first time round.
So-
He did have some people.
I think it's my perspective that is maybe not well understood by the general public that the resources, or more specifically, the land that Putin has occupied and now occupies, how resource rich and important those resources are to the energy security go into the hands of Russia, they further their monopoly on both oil and natural gas. And if you've ever been a consumer in a monopoly, it's very difficult. It's untenable, and there are few ways out. So I'd say that as long as people have a greater understanding that we're providing support to the Ukrainians, and I hope to some degree European partners are as well, they certainly need to step up their game.
They did not say, well, let us bring in, some community
the
leaders.
energy needs of Europe, and therefore trade amongst the world as it is today, depends on us not giving up that land. Not because of lives or relations, but because of resources, which is the basis of most conflict in the world. It's over resources.
We've got a new guy on the stage that I don't know how, Phil, I don't know how long you've been listening, but we're really wrestling with this problem, and I wonder if you've got any insights as to cessation of land, what's going to happen, what should happen on Friday, etc. You want to contribute your insight?
Thank you, Hanson. Listen, I can talk way too much. I'm going to try and be incredibly brief. There are two ways that countries lose wars, militarily and then politically. And to focus in on that, I'll give you two examples. At the end of the Second World War, the Germans lost that war militarily, i.e. the Allies, the Russians, went all the way to Berlin. The Germans could not put another army in the field, defeated militarily. If you look at Vietnam, America lost that war politically. So the North Vietnamese, the Viet Cong, did not go all the way to Washington to defeat the United States. But the United States just said, this is costing us too much to keep prosecuting this war. We're getting nowhere. So if you understand the way that wars are lost, militarily, and then also politically, it then kind of informs what is going on with Russia and Ukraine. So if we look at this, it's an asymmetric war, i.e. the Russians actually could wipe the Ukrainians out tomorrow by dropping nuclear bombs. They're not going to do that because it'd be the end of the world. And even if they did a relatively small nuclear strike, the whole world would turn against them. It'd be such a ratcheting up. But on paper, it's an asymmetrical fight. So what are they actually fighting for? The Russians thought they could knock the Ukrainians out of the field militarily by going all the way to Kiev, having a regime change, and then they could then take the land in the east, which is exactly actually what they've done. However, the Ukrainians were fighting to defend their land and hoping that at some point the cost would be too high for the Russians. The fact of the matter is that from a Western perspective, we don't know when civil society will collapse in Russia, i.e. the institutions away from the state will just say, this is too expensive a fight. Somebody said on the stage that 1 million Russians, there have been 1 million Russian casualties. That appears to be the Western consensus. We don't really know, but this appears to be the consensus. And if you look at when Russia fought the war in Afghanistan, it was much less Russian casualties, which then caused Russian mothers to complain and to demonstrate in Moscow, St. Petersburg, etc., and say we need to bring our boys home. But Putin has a much more iron grip on Russian society and the political apparatus than Gorbachev did at the end of the Soviet Union. So, rationally, the Ukrainians are going to have to give up some land regardless. Crimea is gone. The West has tacitly admitted that since 2014. That's gone. It ain't ever coming back in a plausible scenario. If you look at a map, it's a quiet secret here. If you look at a map of the formation of the Ukraine when it's part of the Soviet Union in 1922-24, those eastern bits which the Russians wanted to have occupied were not part of the new state of Ukraine, Soviet state of Ukraine. Actually, what the Russians have done is literally got all of their war aims, apart from having an acquiescent regime in Kiev. So, what are the Ukrainians fighting for? And bear in mind, I'm on the side of the Ukrainians in this fight. They fought for their independence as a state away from the Russian yoke. They fought for that. They managed to do that, and they forged a new national identity, which is much less Russian than it was before. And I forget what the percentage of the Ukrainian state spoke Russian. Let's say it was 30%, 20%. It's somewhere between those two. There is a much more homogeneous Ukrainian state which has been forged. They can valiantly say, we have defined who we are as a people, and actually they can walk away with this with honor. It feels like a relative defeat, but actually their political independence has been kept. I rest my case.
Mr. Royfield, I still have that bottle of bourbon made by that great assistant distiller for you sitting at the cottage.
Next time I'm in the great snowy north of the United States, my friend, I will come look you up.
Yeah, promises. You say that about the next time you're in the Pacific Northwest, and then suspiciously, your trip comes and goes, no phone call, no look.
Wait a minute. I have not been to the Pacific Northwest in forever. I haven't admittedly been to the great state of Minnesota.
Fair enough. Look, we have 15 minutes left in this room. This is a good opportunity for people to get their last thoughts, and want to just welcome anyone that hasn't spoken yet to get those off, and then I'd love to hear Anson, your conclusion after hearing people's points. What you think? So anyone that hasn't spoke, go now.
Stick around, Royfield, because I really would like to get your feedback on what I'm going to say in the next 10 minutes or so.
Okay, nobody's speaking.
I was waiting for new speakers that just didn't get a chance, but I disagree with Royfield on the political independence. I think, unfortunately for Ukraine, they have too many devils they're dancing with, too many high-level interests. If I was Ukraine, I'd be wary of the U.S. I'd be wary of taking a dime. It comes with conditions, and the U.S. is notorious for exacting its price. It will get double what it invested in. The same thing in Europe. I don't think it's really truly independence that goes, but I mean we can discuss the rationale of the Andrea Newland types, or Victoria Newlands, whichever ones you want to. I'm sorry, I keep getting those names mixed up. But if we're going to, I don't know if they've actually won the optics of having political independence from Russia. If the fact is that Russia can still influence their elections as well as the U.S.
Okay, it's not quite a binary in the way that you posted, I would say. More Ukrainians than didn't prior to the invasion wanted some level of a closer alignment with the EU. And they wanted eventual accession to the EU. And that's not an opinion, that's just a fact. And you had changes in regime, Yanukovych, etc., in Ukraine, which kind of mirrored that. But there was a strong element, people in the east, people in the south, who were ethnically Russian, or at least spoke Russian as their first tongue, who wanted to more align the state with Russia. Now, if those territories have been cleaved off and now part of Russia, the demographics alone will tell you you have a more homogeneously Ukrainian state. Again, that's not rocket science, that's just the practicalities on the ground. So, whether the Ukrainian state is going to be in the pay to America, I would kind of question that in the medium to long term, but they have fought and won their independence away from being part of the Russian sphere of influence. And Wheel made a point, which I thought was quite clever. He said, why are we backing the Ukrainians in this? and Anson or somebody else I think it was Marshall, sorry, answered this by saying this was a point of morality and political and geopolitical norms since 1945, that in Europe, countries don't roll over borders and snaffle other people's land. And whilst that is true, the real politique of it is, if this had happened in, I don't know, Asia or Africa, we wouldn't really be that bothered. The West is more bothered about this because A, it's Europe, and B, these countries, the next countries potentially to be threatened are the Baltics, who are part of NATO, and so they get incredibly jumpy. So you have to then understand. Yeah, 1 minute, son. My son's at the door. You have to understand in the wider geopolitical context, the Ukrainians have pushed themselves away from Russian influence. That's a fact.
I just have one question, which is, by giving this land, we achieve what objective?
Peace.
You mean getting Ukraine?
Yeah, by giving away portions of Ukraine, again, ignoring the resource-rich nature, we receive peace. I'm not much of a historian, Captain, you know more than I do, and have a great perspective. Has that occurred other times in life where we've successfully given land and it's resulted in long-term lasting peace?
I don't know. I'm not an expert on American history, but I'd say maybe Vietnam, maybe.
There are loads of instances throughout history where there have been peace treaties which have been concluded.
Just name one or two, not a lot.
Well, you could go to the Congress of Vienna in 1815 when we defeat Napoleon, and actually what the Allies don't do is carve France up into pieces. Basically, the French national borders of today are the French national borders which were defined by the Congress of Vienna in 1815, and the French were defeated. Like, they basically are the same. So there are loads of examples. Another example of a political defeat over a military one is the American War of Independence. Yorktown did not mean that the British couldn't put any more troops in North America. There were troops occupying New York 2 years after Yorktown. But it was a political defeat. The British just said, us to keep on fighting this is just too expensive. Give them their bloody independence. So there is a rationality to a lot of this, which in hindsight makes complete utter sense. It might feel bitter at that moment, but you look at it in hindsight and you say, that's kind of all right. You've got to understand, what were the Ukrainians truly fighting for? Yes, to defend their sovereignty, to keep every inch of land, but they're fighting an asymmetric war. It's not two equal powers going up against themselves. It's much more, there are more Ukrainians per head of the population in the field against the Russians than the Russians are put in the field against the Ukrainians. Russia is 3 times bigger, it has a much bigger military, etc. That doesn't mean necessarily they're going to win the war militarily. The Ukrainians could keep fighting until the Russians just kind of give up. But how long is that going to take, is the question. And do the Ukrainians have the political will to keep on fighting? Do they have the economic heft to keep on putting those troops in the ground? Do they have the manpower, etc.? And will their allies keep going? And this is an interesting question which has been brought up by somebody before in this room, about talking about the European perspective. and this is where I slightly disagree. Americans generally kind of think that NATO is completely an American-backed thing, and it is an American-backed organization. However, with the accession of Trump, what has happened to NATO is that all of the NATO countries are now spending much more on defense, even Germany. So there is a very clear difference between European support for Ukraine and American support. Is that European support enough to substitute for American? No, not yet. But there is a scenario, I would say it's not likely, but there is a scenario that the Americans can just say, fuck it, doesn't really matter. And the Europeans kind of just say, no, we're going to keep going with this Macron, Starmer, and the new Chancellor of Germany. It's not that plausible, but there is one way that the Ukrainians could keep going. But for what? They're not going to roll back anytime soon the losses that have been made to Russia. There needs to be a political view that these lands have been lost, but we have gained our independence away from Russia.
Royfield, I think everybody know at this point that it's not Ukraine versus Russia per se. I think it's, of course, everybody knows it's NATO against Russia in Ukraine, which is completely different. We're talking about Ukraine. Ukraine could have been finished already, let's say, in a matter of a couple of months, maybe 2-3 months.
That's not true. That's not true. There's a large elements of truth to what you're saying, but that initial push by the Russians, where they thought they could just go down from the north and be in Kiev in 2 to 3 days, what stopped them wasn't NATO. That was this will and the resolve of the Ukrainian army. And to be honest, the incompetence of the Russians, because they thought they were just going to go in and in effect have a coup d'etat and put a Russian-leading government there. They were not properly prepared for a long war. So they just trundled in. But it was the Ukrainians' fortitude and determination which turned them back. It absolutely was. Don't get me wrong, what has kept them going has been NATO arms, which is really a pseudonym for American arms. But initially, do not underestimate the fighting resolve of fighting for your homeland. It's one of those massive imponderables when you look at wars. Which is the reason why
Did you say imponderable?
Yeah, it's one of those things you can't factor in. So
That's
you
a
can
good word. I've never even heard it.
Welcome to British English, my friend. We have many of these types of words which you Americans can only but dream of. But when you can look at so many instances of countries that go through a revolution and then are invaded by a neighbor, the neighbor thinking that this country is going to be weak, and it utterly gets turned on its head. Big example, Iran-Iraq war, early 1980s. Saddam Hussein invades Iran thinking I'll get these oil fields in the southwest, because the Iranians have gone through a revolution. They don't know the arse of their elbows, but filled with the revolutionary zeal and the fact you're fighting for your homeland, the Iranians pushed them back. You could do the Vietnam War, which is exactly the same type of thing, goes on and on and on. So don't just think that the Ukrainians were just propped up by Western arms, because no, their battle hardiness and their strategic nous is actually truly their own, because they're fighting for their homelands. They've seen their homes destroyed, etc. And it's a massive, as I said before, military imponderable. You don't know how strong people will fight when the backs are up against the wall when you're defending your home.
I think there's an opportunity here, at least for the United States. We're witnessing sort of the transition from an old conventional kinetic war to a highly technology-based conflict where the more technology is used, the fewer people are being lost on the battlefield, or at least that's a perspective, certainly a Ukrainian perspective or a bias from a Ukrainian standpoint. They're substituting drones for soldiers and having great success recently, 2-3 months. so reluctant to flux a little bit of technological might if we're so damn sophisticated and mighty? Is maybe my question. Like, why you don't see a chess master forego an opportunity to sit down at the board and move some pieces? Why are we so reluctant? Why are we so, shall I say, cowardice?
Let's not forget that this is the cheapest it's ever going to get to kill Russian soldiers. And for that alone, we got to weigh that in. Anson, you want to get some final thoughts here?
Yeah, I finally voted. I'm sorry the poll's still not up there, but I finally voted not to give an inch, but I say that de jure. And this is where I suggested earlier that we can maybe achieve peace with a de facto temporary cessation of land, i.e. have an armistice on the current battle lines, and then not cede land de jure through an ultimate peace treaty. In other words, a Korea-like situation. That could be an outcome of the war, and in then trying to figure out the final boundaries for a peace treaty would take extensive negotiations, recognizing something that I think Royfield has introduced, that Ukraine before 2014 was 25-30% Russian and the rest Ukraine, and now they are essentially 100% Ukraine with very little Russians in the current territory that's controlled by Kiev. And that means something, but it counters the moral stance of it's immoral for a country to invade another country and gain any land. And I don't know how you convince, and Broyfield also said that's really just a European situation, European slant Eastern Asia or Western Asia situation, if you don't consider Russia European, and that people gain land all the time through wars in the Middle East, in Africa, and all over other places in the world. And the final thought that I would have is that this idea of Russia invading Europe if they gain traction in Ukraine, the last time I checked the map, the Soviet Union did not invade Europe, and they owned all of Ukraine. So I'm not particularly concerned about the considerations of if Ukraine does de jure give up land, that automatically means the next war is going to be across a NATO boundary. I'm not sure that argument holds much. That bucket holds much water. But it's a tough one. I don't have any firm convictions on this thing, one way or the other. But I can wrap it up with a de facto armistice ceding land, holding in abeyance a de jure peace treaty ceding the land legally, such that world maps are drawn with new boundaries across the country of Ukraine. And I will also add that I don't think Putin will go for that kind of he's going to want a de jure. He's not going to settle for a de facto, and he may just keep fighting unless he gets a de jure peace treaty out of this thing. Good room. Again, good discussion. Thanks for doing it, Roger.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, everyone, I posted up top. You guys might want to RSVP. We're going to do the official money bomb for John Kitover for Congress. It's going to happen at 5 o'clock Pacific time, about an hour and a half from now. So you guys might want to RSVP for that. Thanks for showing up. Make sure you join the Rational Discussion Group. We will we'll be back here 5 days a week talking about these things. And we welcome everyone to join. It's the fastest growing house on the entire app. Thank you very much for participating. Have a good day.
Yeah, wanted to thank everybody. I just set up a campaign to contribute to candidate Congressman John Kitover. If you do want to join that room and you do want to give $1 or $200, I would greatly appreciate it, because that money will be used to recruiting on the ground people to get signatures on these ballots so we can get on the March primary. If you do want to contribute, that's what the money will be used for. And then any residual money will be used for media buying and paying maybe another Clubhouse user, Augustus, to create creatives for the media buys. So, hope you enjoyed this. This has been Rational Discussion Group. I can leave this room open if you want and mod everybody else. Replays are on. No reason to kill a positive vibration. But I've been working in my other office getting an event page set up and a donation page set up. It's pretty easy. If you want to invite people to this room, feel free. The official John Kitover Congress Money Bomb link is pinned above. It starts in an hour and 24 minutes. So that's 7 Central, 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. If you go to johnforcongress.com, or I will pin the link here as well. Let me see if I can get it. It's on my X account. Let me see if I can.
So Congressman's gonna read?
Well, we're all gonna read. The source material is pinned above. We're gonna take turns. It's in nifty little verses, so everybody gets a turn.
I can't participate as a psychosilveractive.
Really?
Simon as you did. You can't afford my rate, Roger.
Well, I hope you know that Clubhouse owns the rights to your voice.
That's right, exactly. They do, but you don't. Unless your buddy's streaming us. Is he streaming us with 27 rooms?
He's not here yet, so this room currently is not being streamed.
Are you still doing your 2 o'clock reasonable house room about National Guard?
You've been at it as a moderator, and the room still started 1:50 to make sure we get jump on the room for
Good to know. Alright, well I should probably do my pre-moderating warm-up exercises until then. Well, enjoy your afternoon. And maybe I'll check with my agent, see if I can jump into your room 150.
Is there a topic for 150 or we don't know yet?
Oh, we have a topic. We're talking about what's happening in DC.
Well, that's right, you said that, I apologize.
See, this one, juicy. You like the word juicy? Scarlet TT's like the word juicy.
Not like succulent better. Succulent is juicy.
I like the juicy. For fun.
It's better than moist.
You don't like the word moist?
Women don't. I like it.
I don't like when I'm moist, but I don't.
How can you not like moist and be a member of the In the Hush?
It's not so bad. Watermelon's pretty good.
Alright. Lowers uric acid levels too, by the way, fun fact.
Don't even know what that is, but I'll imagine that's good for you.
Very good for you.
And just in case people, medical tip, although I'm not a doctor, I did read this once. If you have problems urinating, eat watermelon, obviously, but specifically the watermelon seeds help with urination problems. Anybody who needs to know that information.
The only urination problem that I have is urgency issues.
Old wives' tale. I don't think those seeds should be clogging up the digestive system.
If you can chew them finely, maybe brine them, you gotta brine.
not seen him answer every question. Not to speak time.
Okay, so give me the set of all non-contingent. And if I get in trouble here, so that's a good thing. And then we have Yasi, and Yasi has two very important jobs. First, she is the producer. She keeps me on the straight and narrow.
Already responsible then from the time that they owned that stock forward to all that appreciation in the persons that passed away.
For some reason, it was
Respect anyone, and they tend to take over holy places of other religions, like the Jewish holy sites, like India.
Agree with some of the shit that they do. If they're spiritually, if that's what they are, we kind of have to follow that. That's a part of spirituality, which is a large part of caring for human beings. Just because it.
So she doesn't bark all the time, but it's like because they live in like out in.
And everybody's welcome on stage, and also Marshall. We have Marshall.
Thank you. You see why Yasi? See why I need her? Because yes, Marshall, you want to say anything about your moderation? We'll get to specifics on the topic as we go. But do you want to say good evening?
Good evening. In this room, try not to be political. I try to just do the basic historical research for the room. So I am getting ready to go get a haircut. So I have to be. I gotta go wash my hair real quick, basically. But I'll be around, and if we need to look something up, I'll look it up and send it to Yossi if need be, and we can get back on that. I work in campaign politics for a living, and I found remaining assiduously non-political in your room is one of the best ways to help. So,
and it's very helpful, and we have some wonderful conversations. We don't always agree, but what I love about Marshall is that he is very fair-minded, and he is certainly not a member of the cult. I'll leave it there. Last week we talked about patriotism, what a patriotic American does, and I think we agreed, although with some maybe little arguments, that we all have a common obligation to support our government. And the main way we do that is by paying our share of taxes. Taxes are a difficult subject. They're hard to enforce. And one of the great things about last week's room is it helped me really think through the issue of enforcing the common will of the governed, and as it relates to taxes, that was not really on the direct topic, but as a result of some conversations that my wife and I had, we did get into it. I am interested in knowing from anyone on the stage what you think about no tips on taxes. Is it good or is it bad? And if you have an opinion about whether it's good or bad, tell me why. As you may know, this is one of Donald Trump's policy, no tips on taxes. Is it a good thing or a bad thing?
May I answer?
Yes. You may, Mojo.
Not only is it a good thing, it's a great thing. And by the way, it's not his idea. Ron Paul was talking about this 15 years ago, and it was resuscitated. In fact, it was first brought up by Ron Paul when he was speaking in Nevada, and when Donald Trump started flirting with libertarians during the election process, he got plugged into things that might matter to them. And in the state of Nevada, where you have people working for tips that make up a good percentage of the state, it's a message that really resonates. The reason why I think it's a brilliant strategy is that tips in general is it's a gift, it's an extra.
the idea of treating it like a wage, it's never made sense to me. It's something where, they already collect a wage. Now, we've normalized the practice of tipping them. Maybe if we normalize the practice of tipping people for any job that they do, that would be a good thing for them. But I'm not a big fan of looking for more ways to take money from employees. I'm looking for more ways to allow people to keep their money. And this one seems like a very obvious low-hanging fruit to allow people that live on the margins to keep more of what they earn. And the other part that's important with it is to understand that the way that it's being framed is it's not for everyone, and it's not unlimited. There's caps on how much income you can have and how much tax relief that you're going to get. I think it's an excellent step in the right direction of understanding that we're overtaxed.
So, Roger, the first thing I heard is that you think it's good because a tip should be a gift, and it shouldn't be normalized as part of someone's salary. Is that a fair characterization of the first thing you said?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. The second thing you haven't weighed in on, but I'd be curious to know, do you agree that it's all a part of all of our common obligation to pay taxes whether we agree with what the government does or not?
No, I think that there needs to be a much deeper discussion about what the rights of man are and what and what the government spends their money on, and until the government shows that they can pass a balanced budget amendment and spend money wisely, I think that we should all be revolting. I think the 27 grievances that was sent to the king were much smaller grievances than the ones that I have today. And so absolutely, I would revolt. We have $37 trillion worth of debt and $100 trillion in unfunded liabilities. And I think it's high time for another.
What I think you said is you recognize that as a citizen, we all have a common obligation to pay for the common good, but you're not happy with the way the government is currently spending its money. Would that be a fair characterization?
Well, you and I might disagree on what the common good is. The only thing I want the federal government spending money on is military, police, and courts. I think everything else is a violation of our Constitution.
Okay, well, I'm not an accelerationist. I don't believe that the solution to our problems is to blow everything up. I'm an incrementalist, and I think we learn, we grow, we improve incrementally, and as a result, I just would like to kind of leave it with you there that you do argue with how the money is spent, but you also recognize that if you could be persuaded that certain things are for the common good, you agree that we have a responsibility as citizens to pay for our fair share. Is that fair?
I do think we should fund the military, courts, and police, and the way that I would propose to go about doing that would be with usage fees, lotteries, and things of that.
We'll get there, but next week you're going to love the topic, because the topic next week is, what does the federal government do that we can live without? And I think that's a fair discussion. But today we're going to confine ourselves to how we define our common obligation. So I thank you for your participation and your basic consent or agreement that when something can be agreed that we need it in common, we should pay for it. Now we're going to discuss today how we do that. How we pay for our specific patriotic obligation. Yeah, go ahead.
This is Jim.
Yes.
First, I want to tell you, chat won't work for me. I double tapped on it and it won't let me at it.
Yeah, Jim, we understand that.
So tips, it's kind of interesting because I did work for Disney. That was my first adult job. And one of the things that happened there is that there are many cultures where the tip is considered part of the bill. And so a lot of people, from other countries thought it was part of the bill. I think, just like the previous speaker said, that it's a gift. And I think tipping culture is going through some transition right now. I think sometimes we're asked a little bit much for tips, but I really do think that it is a gift. And
Well,
You know, when I give somebody a tip, I'm saying thank you in a different way than just saying thank you.
that's right, Jim. And I am going to change my behavior towards people who receive tips drastically since the tips can't be taxed. I pay taxes on what I'm giving them. So I've had to pay a tax on the dollar that I'm giving to them, and they don't have to pay a tax on receiving it. It's unlike that in any other form of employment. If I have an employee and I pay that employee, I withhold payroll taxes and I withhold Social Security taxes. But as a worker in a restaurant or someone who receives tips, they don't have to pay taxes on it. And I think that if people want to grumble about what the government is doing, that is absolutely your right. But I think it's extremely unpatriotic to argue that you shouldn't pay taxes if you disagree with what the government is doing.
I also want to say real quick that can we agree that the tariffs are being paid by the person that poses the tariffs, or the nation poses the tariffs, and not by those others? In other words, when it hits the port, we pay for it. Can we agree on that?
We will talk about that in a minute, Jim. I think I don't think the way you said it is what you mean, but we'll get to that in a minute. I think Grover Norquist is a complete coward. And I know that some people may disagree, but that's why next week we are going to talk about what does the government do that we really, really don't need? What can we live without? And I'm extremely eager to hear people's idea. I will give you an example of something that the government does for me, and it does it for Jim too, that maybe I could live without, and that is paratransit. Now, paratransit is paid for by some federal subsidies, and yes, it does make life for disabled people a hell of a lot easier. But, as Roger says very eloquently, we have $37 trillion of federal debt. And if we have that kind of debt, maybe I shouldn't have paratransit. I'm perfectly willing to sacrifice that. And I hope that next week, rather than cowardly saying, let's blow the whole thing up, that people will come to this room with some ideas, some real serious ideas about what we can live without. So ultimately, there are three forms of taxation. They are consumption taxes, wealth taxes, and income taxes. Now, Roger might argue, and we'll get to this in a second, that there also are lotteries, and I will cover that. Consumption taxes. Let's talk about those first. Those are the easiest form for the government to calculate. They are the easiest form for the government to collect by far. They also are voluntary in the sense that someone is choosing to purchase something, and just by virtue of the fact that they have purchased that thing, they are paying the tax. So it is a form of voluntary taxation, unlike the other two forms of taxation that we'll discuss today. They are also regressive. That means that they fall much harder on poorer people than wealthier people. I don't think anybody needs proof of that, but does anybody have any question about the fact that they are regressive? Okay, good. Excellent. I did mention that I would talk about lotteries. I think a lottery is, do we all know what a lottery is? It's an extremely inefficient use of a dollar. Now, I think we can agree that if you spend $10 and the government only gets one of those, and we call that a tax, that's an extremely inefficient tax. It also has a moral component, and some people may object to it, or some people may not object to it. That's the idea that you're encouraging people to gamble, essentially, or to voluntarily pay taxes. But as I said, if they want to voluntarily pay it, you know, it's like if I have one of these deals at a restaurant where they'll give back a share of the bills to the charity if they have a dinner night. That, well, you spend $100, and maybe you get back 10 or 15 to the organization. That is very inefficient. So it is a kind thing that they do essentially. It is a thing that gives you something theoretically back for your tax dollar, but it's inefficient. I also think there is a moral component to it in that the government is, with the lottery, encouraging particularly poorer people to spend money that they may not have. And I was a real believer in the lottery in California when it was put on the ballot in about 1987 or 88, I think. And my wife, women often have a better understanding of things than men do. My wife talked me out of voting for it. And I am thrilled that she did, because about 10 years later, I heard all of these ads for the lottery that said, what if your number was picked and you didn't play? Well, you might as well go to Las Vegas. You know, I have nothing against Las Vegas collecting tax on their revenue from gambling, but that's very, very, very different than the government encouraging gambling. I should also mention that sin taxes, that's a tax on cigarettes, a tax on alcohol, those are also sales taxes. So they are essentially trying to use social legislation to encourage certain behavior. In other words, we're going to make cigarettes more expensive so that fewer people smoke them, or we're going to collect taxes on alcohol to pay for the damage that alcohol does to our culture. I don't think that's a moral issue. Do we have any need to discuss this before we move on from sales tax and lottery?
I'd just like to say, Alan, that in regards to the sin, well, I'll say two things. One, here in Ontario, lotteries is a corporation that's run by the government. So it's the Ontario Lottery Corporation. It covers lotteries and all gambling in the province. Other than that's those that are on reserves. That's how that's operated here. So they have their finger in it right away. And in terms of the sin taxes, I suppose morally they're trying to get people not to smoke or curb alcoholism, etc. But they raise a lot of money that way too. So I don't know how they can sit on both sides of the fence, but they do. So.
Well, personally, I'm a fan of sin taxes. I think, even though I think social legislation using the tax policy to enforce certain social ideas may not always be the wisest. I think sin taxes may be one of the best.
I'm on the opposite side. I'm for tax credits for sinning. Like, you fornicate twice and you get a tax credit. Like, that would be my thought.
The Reverend Scott Jones has been heard from. Can I just say, I would be really interested in having that run by the church. All right, that's. You never know what's
that would put asses in the seats. That kind of preaching puts asses in the seats.
Yeah, and that's what the collection plays for.
Well, I think Scott's idea of the collection plate is people should take money out of it and not put money into it. I don't know. But anyhow, that's funny, Scott. That's absolutely hysterical. Let me just say I'm not a fan of that kind of syntaxes. I think the government should stay out of our bedrooms altogether. We kind of learned that last week, or at least tried to. I'm not sure we succeeded, but anyhow. You missed a doozy on that one, Reverend Jones. Okay, so, by the way, tariffs are also a tax. And I think it's really important. If Abby was here, and I wish she were, because she tried to argue this with me once, and I wasn't prepared. And one of the things that I have learned, if I'm going to be in a discussion with Abby, is I should always be prepared. I am both a husband and a brother. Now, the fact that I am a brother has nothing to do with the fact that I am a husband. Abby was arguing that the tariffs are not a tax because their purpose is to foster and encourage a certain industrial process in the United States. That may be true. I am a brother. But as far as anybody is concerned, when they purchase something, they are paying a tax. And in that sense, it is important that we tell the truth about it. And a tariff is a tax. Does anyone want to argue with me on that? I'm glad to hear that. All right. Now, the second form of taxation is wealth taxes. I'm sure Roger and I are not going to completely agree on this, but I would love to try to come to a compromise with him on it. Wealth taxes, I don't mean what Elizabeth Warren is talking about, because I think that her idea was absolutely insane. Can someone give me an example of a federal wealth tax? Okay, hearing none, I will tell you of a couple of them.
The net investment income tax for investment earnings when your gross income exceeds $200,000.
That's an income tax. That's good try, Monica, but that I would classify because it's related to your income. That is an income tax. No, capital gains.
Interesting. Okay.
Capital gains and capital gains are gains on an asset. You bought a stock at 10, you sold it at 100, and you pay a certain tax on that gain. Capital gains is a very clear form of wealth tax, and I would add to it that it's fairly easy to calculate. It's fairly easy to collect. Now, we have some discussions about long-term capital gains and short-term capital gains, and if somebody wants to engage in that discussion, I'm perfectly happy to engage in it. The current idea is that you pay less tax if you hold something more than a specific period of time, I believe it's a year, and you pay more tax if you turn it over quicker. If I were writing the tax law, I would absolutely argue that we need a third form of capital gains tax, and this would not be for necessarily to raise revenue. It would be to discourage a behavior, and that would be day trading, a huge tax on day trading. Why? Because day trading doesn't help anybody except the trader. It does nothing for in fact, it hurts other traders because it'll make the price of stocks deviate more widely. So we could debate that at some point, but that would be one of the things I would point. Another form of wealth tax is property tax, and I thought about this for a while, but we're not going to talk about property tax much in this room because it's not a federal tax. Capital gains is, but we don't have a federal tax on property that I'm aware of, at least. If some tax eagle was here, they might argue with me on a small finer point, but that's pretty much it for wealth taxes. Does anybody want to discuss anything about wealth taxes specifically? Okay, wealth taxes are not as easy to collect as sales taxes, but nowhere near as complicated to collect as income taxes. And that is the last form of taxation we're going to talk about. Oh, before we do that though, there is one idea that I have for, it came up last week, and it's for dealing with reparations. I am not a fan of giving people money in terms of reparations. On the other hand, it is very clear that historically the black community has suffered from things that have kept their wealth from growing. So I would be a fan of incorporating wealth taxes, incorporating reparations into wealth taxes by perhaps giving blacks a higher allowance on their estate taxes than everyone else. But that's for another day. It's just one idea, and I'm not saying it's necessarily a good idea, but I think
would you give that to would you have to be black, or would you have to be African descendant of slaves?
I think you'd have to prove you were a descendant of slaves.
Because like in that instance, like you would get like somebody like Barack Obama who wouldn't qualify for it, and Michelle Obama who would, right? I mean,
yeah, you'd have to prove that one member of the couple was a descendant of slaves, and I think it would be. What I like about your question, Scott, is it gets to the essence of what's wrong with the idea of just paying just paying out a dollar amount. I'm very much opposed to that, but I think that if we were to reinstate what I think is one of the best form of taxation, which is this inheritance tax, we would be all much better off. And by the way, I don't know if Roger is still in the room, but if he is, he was given a very good piece of advice, tax advice, the other day in a room, and I didn't get a chance to say it. It may not be to his personal liking, and I respect that, and I don't think the government should ever tell people how they should behave. But if you give your money to your children while they're living, you can avoid a certain amount of inheritance tax if you're at that level. And Roger isn't even at that level, so it doesn't matter, you know, if what he told me is true, it doesn't even matter. But I would favor bringing the estate tax level way back down, maybe as low as $1 million, and it would raise a significant amount of money. And not only that, but it would level the playing field. Why should my children, who are raised by a middle-class person, be at a tremendous disadvantage relative to a wealthy person's children?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, by the way, I wanted to acknowledge it. Well, Roger is not in the room, he left, but his cohort and my good friend Anson is here. Okay, Anson, congratulations on the beginning of your new ring, and I want to know, where are you getting such creative titles? I mean, you guys are oozing creativity. I love it. Congratulations on the rooming.
You can respond to that, Anson.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. We're at least the first room poached right off of the critical thinking.
Second one today too, the exact same title.
That was more. That wasn't intentional poaching, but I'm not.
I looked intentional because it wasn't. There were no different prepositions or anything. It was pasted. It was the exact same.
But what I'm trying to do is to get the opportunity, you know, have a rational discussion rather than one person speaks, they go down to the audience, next person speaks. I really like the conversational mode and still being able to make forward progress. And thus far, we've been able to do that. We've only had 3 rooms, and we also have a poll in the room so that we can check what the room temperature is. In other words, is there an overwhelming sentiment one way or the other, and then see how that poll evolves as the discussion goes in the room. And it's interesting. I'm enjoying it, and I wish you guys the best over in the Critical Thinking Forum. But I just decided to try a different tact, and we're not trying to poach on your topic.
If you need me to copy the room titles to save you time, I could message them to you. They're like 4:45, just to save you time.
I'm sorry, I've got my hearing aids in, but I didn't hear what you said.
I said if it would save you time, I could get the room titles early, and I could message them to you, so that just save you time.
Well, I think between Roger and myself and Steve and Moose, we'll be able to come up with some pretty interesting titles.
Well, if it's past this prologue, you have it, yeah. But I look forward to this, and I think you're a creative guy. I want to encourage you. I think you will.
Well, we're trying a different approach, really, in the way the room is controlled, and how people are allowed or not allowed to engage in a conversation as opposed to a speech.
That is great.
That's what we're trying to do, and thus far, I mean, today I have no idea what the output was in the Critical Thinking Forum as to whether Ukraine should give up land or not. But I'll tell you, we had a wonderful discussion, and the difficulty. Hell, I didn't know how to vote in the poll. I mean, the difficulty of that subject is intense. But we really had a great discussion, and it was not just a one position decision. There was a real blend of more than anything, a blend of confusion and uncertainty as to what's in the best interest of America, Ukraine, and the world at
I
large.
think Vladimir Putin thrives on American uncertainty and ambiguity.
Oh, of course he does. Of course he does. Of course he does. But and he sees it. He does everything in his power to stimulate that uncertainty. But we actually don't need much help from the Russians in that regard because we are very, well. I'm not going to give my Great Divide speech, but I don't think Russia caused the Great Divide. I think we're causing it ourselves. But that's beside the point. But anyway, thanks for asking. And I'm going to stay up here on the stage. I don't really have any prearranged thoughts on your topic, but I'm interested in the conversation, and I might inject myself somewhere along the line here.
I encourage everybody to learn how to make better use of Clubhouse. I want to see it be a better venue for discussion, and I think, Anson, before you came, we talked about the challenge in America with all of the different kinds of ideas and the complexity that goes on here. So the purpose tonight is to talk about three forms of taxation: consumption, wealth, and income. And we were in the middle of discussing wealth tax. One of the things I find very disturbing about Clubhouse, and that may ultimately cause me to give up what I'm trying to do here, is how people will come in to troll and throw out an idea, but they don't want to stay and argue it. To me, that suggests that they aren't very deep, that their thoughts are just, how can I make a point for my side? I have no interest in making a point for my specific side. I don't even know what my side is other than the side of rationality. And so I think we will hopefully learn, all of us together, Gary and Anson, you and myself, and all of us will learn how to have intelligent discussions without people getting on their soapbox. Anyway,
what consumption, wealth, and what was the third form of taxation? Income. What's the difference between wealth and income?
Oh, it's huge. Wealth tax is a tax on an asset. It's something that's on your balance sheet.
So wealth does not include income. It just includes land, stocks, whatever.
Existing assets. It's a tax on an asset.
Existing assets.
Right.
If the asset
existing assets,
it may both in its lifetime have to pay income tax on it, like a rental property. But when you sell it, think of like capital gains.
Yeah,
one, you have a gain in asset value appreciation, and the other one is maybe it's income it kicks off.
Let me clear my foggy old mind here. If I make $100,000 a year and pay tax on it, that's income tax.
That's all income.
If I have a stock portfolio worth $1 million and I have a profit on the sale of that stock portfolio of $100,000 in a year, that is wealth tax.
That's a capital gain.
Both get taxed.
No.
But
Yes,
that's
we don't have
wealth
wealth
tax.
We do
This
have
is when Mitt Romney ran against Barack Obama.
Okay,
Barack Obama paid the highest tax rate, and Mitt Romney paid like half of it.
Just real quick, Scott. In America, we don't have wealth taxes yet. We have capital gains tax,
Right, capital
which
gains,
transfers, it translates to your income tax and gets split based upon how your other income's composed and how much you have. But income from assets is income itself. But we do not have a wealth tax as of yet in America.
Do you remember
Respectfully, in Washington State, a wealth tax was passed.
Okay, let's slow this down. Let's slow this down. Anson, when you report your capital gain, you report it on your income tax return. It is still a tax on wealth. It is not a tax on, you could claim it's a tax on income, but technically you are paying that tax because you have wealth. So
So I would then, the fact that somebody said we do not currently have a wealth tax, but what you're saying, Alan, we do have a wealth tax. We just call it capital gains.
Well, I'm trying to help us classify how we tax and what the benefit to the government is, how we talk about it. So yes, Anson, we do not have a wealth tax the way that Elizabeth Warren imagines it, and I think that's a terrible idea. But when you think about it, State taxes at bottom are wealth taxes.
It's a death tax. It's a one-time wealth tax, perhaps.
State income tax is not a wealth tax.
Estate,
But when I pay
estate
taxes,
tax.
when I pay
estate
local
on death.
taxes, when I pay local taxes on my home, that is a wealth tax.
That's a wealth tax. When you pay property taxes, that's a wealth tax. An estate is
Alan,
when you
what-
die.
Can we call them 4 different taxes? One's a property tax. Because you have a property, I would call capital gains and ownership, capital assets that have property taxes, right? Luxury taxes, they fall into property taxes. But I think that the wealth tax, to keep the nomenclature clean, is purely assessed on someone's annually based upon how much wealth they have. That purely probably is a separate thing than a property maintenance tax. Like you have property taxes on a house, right?
The point I'm trying to make is that if you don't have wealth, you don't pay that tax. And
Have property. You can have wealth without any property.
Yes.
What if it's all cash in the bank and it doesn't appreciate?
Then
Say
it's,
that
you're
there
not
is no wealth tax.
Then it's not taxed except at death.
Correct. So that purely tells you whether it's a wealth or a property tax.
Yeah, I mean, I think the nomenclature is hard. But I don't think you can claim to be a patriotic American and then brag about not paying your taxes. I just don't think it matches. So the question becomes, how do we assess what is a fair share or a citizen's obligation? And because I'm trying to confine this to federal taxation and not get into local taxes, I think we have to define what they are, but I don't necessarily want to talk about them because I'm really only interested in discussions about federal taxation. So I guess the point I'm trying to make, David, is that if we would reinstate the inheritance tax down at a reasonable level like it was in the 1960s and before, it would level the playing field. Because why should, a billionaire's children get 100 times more than an average person's children? It would also provide a tremendous amount of income for the federal government. And it also would be, I think, one of the fairest ways to do it. Easy to levy, easy to understand. When we talk about income tax, which we will in a minute, this whole puzzle becomes even more complex. I think one of the reasons people get so exercised about their tax is because they think it's unfair. And I think one of the reasons that they think it's unfair is they conflate a whole bunch of things. They don't look at the whole picture. They just conflate things. They'll do like Roger did and come in and throw a bomb, or not really a bomb, he just made a point. But they don't listen to the whole discussion, so they're really not very, very capable of engaging in the discussion. That's the point I'm trying to make. Okay, so any more need to discuss wealth taxes specifically?
Yeah, if you're going to take the position to reinstate a very aggressive inheritance tax, and that is a wealth tax, then I've got a point to make there, but I don't, but I'll also go with the flow.
All right, well, let's see what we get after the income tax, and then you can come back and maybe you may still want to make that point, because at the end...
That's fine.
Okay. So income tax is very different than the other two forms of taxation that we've talked about. It is a tax on income, and it's very confusing to people for many reasons. First of all, your income tax is divided into two very different kinds of taxation. One is a progressive tax based on your income. The other is a payroll tax. So Medicare, Social Security taxes are not based on your income. They're based on your income, but they're an even share. In other words, it's a specific tax to pay for a specific program. It only goes as high as the the current level is, about $200,000. It is not paid as a share of income beyond that, and it has a designated purpose. Income taxes are progressive in the United States, and we believed, I think rightly, that the people who pay the highest level of taxation are those with the most money. You will hear arguments for a flat tax. A flat tax would be much heavier burden on middle and lower class people than on upper class people. The important thing to understand about your tax bracket is if you are in, let's say, the 28% bracket, it doesn't mean you're paying 28% on every dollar. It means you're paying 28% on the last dollar. So for the first X, you pay 12%. For the next Y, you pay 18%. For the next Z, you pay 28% or whatever it is. When people talk about their tax bracket, it is incredibly confusing because they often do not specify whether they mean their federal and state bracket combined. They often will pay different depending on whether they're self-employed or employed by an employer. So when someone talks about their specific tax bracket, what they really should tell you is the federal tax on their last dollar. That's the only way to compare taxation across the states. Does that make sense to people? Okay, good. So, all that being said, now I think we have a pretty clear idea that our income taxes are divided into a progressive income tax. That is how the federal government raises money. And of course, the corporate taxes are different. We're not going to address that here. And the second form is taxation that is paid for Social Security and Medicare. And that pretty much covers what the three forms of taxation are. Now, Anson, do you still want to make your point about your problem with wealth taxes?
Well, specifically the inheritance tax, and it's the standard argument. If my family owns 2,000 acres of farmland, and you lower the inheritance tax, the threshold of where you have to pay inheritance tax, then in order to pay the tax, I have to sell the farm.
No, you don't. You have to buy life insurance. You have to plan for it. In other words, you're making the Rush Limbaugh, I think, very unintelligent argument that if you haven't planned for it and the government assesses it, that there's something wrong. That's why those of us who sold life insurance sold life insurance. That's one of the reasons.
But to buy a $3 million life insurance policy for the family farm trying to farm 2,000 acres, I can't afford a $3 million life insurance policy, Alan.
Well, then the farm probably isn't in a person's name, and it wouldn't pay its inheritance tax. If you operated a 2,000 acre farm, Anson, you should be doing it as a business, and I can't imagine that in a world full of financial services, nobody's approached you with the conundrum that you have a huge taxable estate and you didn't know you would have to pay premiums for a period of time to have insurance at the time of death.
Well,
I worked in financial services. If it's a new business you came into in retirement and you kept to yourself and nobody told you, it's almost tragic. Otherwise, it's an argument, as Alan says, that is not, it doesn't stand the test of the financial services and all the wealthy people that are already doing something to account for large inheritances. It's part of the business of being rich. You have to know better. You shouldn't be blindsided by being rich.
I can assure you that as a retired naval officer, nobody's approached me to suggest how to manage a multi-million-dollar estate. But that's a joke. But going on with the inheritance tax, let's forget the family farm. Your solution is buy life insurance. I'm not sure I like that insurance or that approach. But let's now go to the guy that has a $3 million stock portfolio. Would the revised inheritance tax that $3 million stock portfolio, assuming I didn't do something sneaky and create a business or whatever David was talking about? My dad if he had a $3 million stock portfolio, would that whole stock portfolio be taxed at whatever percent based upon your inheritance tax, just like the family farm would be taxed at whatever percent?
The probate court settles your estate at death. And what it does is it does an assessment. Creditors and debtors, they arrive to do this reconciliation just like a bankruptcy. Who owes what, who gets what from this estate. So at the end, the net taxable estate is the size, the net worth of the deceased individual. That estate is what is assessed, whatever the threshold is. If it's $5 million and this person ended up having $7 million and $3 million was a stock portfolio and whatever was land assets, usually the illiquid assets like real estate, people intend to not do anything like have a fire sale, and they'll sell the liquid ones. So the stock portfolio is part of that net assessment. Okay, so if Dad has a $5 million stock portfolio, and I go through probate, that the current value, today's value, and whatever, the value when the probate ends is $5 million, then I'll have to pay whatever percent the government decides on that $5 million. On the thing over the threshold. So if it's $5 million and the threshold is 3.5, then it's a 1.5 million taxable estate. If you go look up on the table and it says it's at 20% of $1.5 million, do the math, you're in your car, $300,000, that's the IRS bill. Yep. I got it. I understand now. Thanks for explaining. Was that comport with what you know, Alan?
Yeah, that's consistent. And Anson, your point is, I think, an example of why I wanted to have this discussion. Because for 20 years or more, people listened to an idiot like Rush Limbaugh, a complete, total idiot who had no college education and had very little foresight about what he was talking about. If you own something and you haven't planned for your obligation in taxation at death, shame on you. If the idea is that we don't want to pay taxes, that we just want to accelerate the disintegration of our country, we're on the right course. But if we want to have an intelligent discussion about what fair taxation is, my point is that income tax is problematic because it has so many deductions and ways that we've tried to use for social legislation, and that while I hated Elizabeth Warren's idea about a wealth tax, estate taxes is also a wealth tax, and this nation did quite well when the wealth taxes were at a level that supported the issue. Roger will come in here and say we have $37 trillion of federal deficit. He's right. What the fuck are we going to do about it? And I think that when you have an idiot like Rush Limbaugh or similar right-wing commentators who haven't thought through the whole problem and don't have a better solution, they want to accelerate just the destruction of everything. That's why I say Grover Norquist was a coward. Next week we'll talk about what services we can live without, and I'm perfectly happy to do that. But we have an obligation to pay off our federal deficit. We have an obligation for the common defense. And I would submit we have some other obligations that we should be talking about, and the answer is not to just blow the whole thing up.
Hey, this is Alan. Can I say something?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say to Anson's example as well. If it's purely stock, you can actually gift stock to a beneficiary. You don't actually. It doesn't have to be liquidated. The cost basis gets adjusted. I forgot what the phrase was. It's stepped up.
Stepped up basis.
Yeah, stepped up basis. So on your example of your dad's stock portfolio, you don't actually have to sell it you can gift it. You know, there used to be this phrase when I was on Wall Street. It was make, borrow, die, right? The idea being that once you make enough money and get to a certain level, you spend a lot of time just borrowing because there's a lot of institutions that will loan you money. Like in your dad's case, Anson, they might actually, you know, do some margin loans against your dad's stock. You know, you're paying back the interest. Hopefully, you know, there's never any calls on any of that stock. And then the idea is that you just basically die and leave your inheritance, and in many cases, the original tranche of your wealth is pretty safe. You know, I remember when I was with JP Morgan, every 6 months, we would have to put out these in the paper, you know, like I'm sure you guys have seen it where you are, of unclaimed assets, right? Like there's a, you know, sometimes it's 3 or 4 pages of people who have assets at the bank that the bank hasn't heard from in 5 years. And it's a state requirement, but each state is required, you know, requires the institutions or the companies to list the last known contact, last known sometimes city where they were. But I remember it would be pages and pages of names of people who never claimed assets. And those assets are just sitting in what's called house accounts. And the state is hoping that you never come and claim those assets because the state wants to claim those assets. And in the meantime, you know, the institutions are making trillions on this money, on in interest, you know, lending some of it out. It really is a system. To something you said, Alan, previously, with regards to the deficit, this is just my opinion, right? We hear folks saying, you know, it's always we got to cut spending, we got to cut spending, we got to cut spending. I don't understand why no one wants to raise revenues, because I think the idea of raising revenues, oh, that means we have to raise taxes. Maybe not. Maybe there are some other ways where we can raise revenues in this country. Some of it could be taxes. You know, it doesn't have to be individual. Some of it could be corporate tax. The idea that, you know, we give massive tax breaks to companies, and this idea that somehow it's going to trickle down to the individual employees, it has never worked. Trickle down economics has been something that they started talking about, I think, with Bush Sr. It has never worked. It's a theory that most economists will tell you will never happen, simply because, you know, it's inherently human to be greedy, in a sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I do think we have to figure out, as opposed to cut spending, are there ways to raise revenues? You know, that don't
I think that's
always
right,
go to the top. Yeah.
I think that's right, and I think a big piece of this is to upgrade the quality of conversation that we have around this topic. Because most of the time I just hear conversation that is so inane, for lack of a better word, and I'm trying not to level personal insults at anybody, but it hasn't been thought through. And I think we have a responsibility, or at least the media used to have a responsibility, and I think we as citizens have a responsibility to push back on each other and try to come to more intelligent solutions. It's easy to say that inheritance taxes are bad because someone might lose the family farm, et cetera, et cetera. Then bring me a better solution. I think that you know, the benefit to asset taxes, or to particularly to inheritance tax, is that it has the potential to somewhat level the playing field. And I think this is one of the real problems in our country. And if you don't believe that you want the playing field to be leveled, then say that. You know, maybe you believe, I'm not saying anybody in particular, but if someone really believes that the best way to have a country is to have a very few people at the top and a massive number of people at the bottom, then we're doing great. I don't think most people believe that. And I think most of the discussion around it is had by people who have not considered the implications of what they're saying. And they get away with saying things that are just not true. And that's particularly true around inheritance tax.
Yeah, I think it's because
Well, I have a question about inheritance tax, if you don't. Well,
let Daryl make his point.
I have a question about inheritance tax. Daryl, please finish. Sorry.
Go ahead, Daryl.
Yeah, no, what I was going to say is I think we see things happening around us that we don't understand that our taxes pay for these things, right? So if there's a fire, your taxes are probably paying for your fire department, your ambulance service, you know, your police, even if you're in a small town and it's just your sheriff. I think that people don't make the connection that, hey, my tax dollars pay for these services in my community, large or small. And I actually wonder, if you ask them, hey, who do you know, they'll tell cops, right? You see this on TV and TV shows. Hey, I pay your taxes, you work for me, right? But that individual cop pays taxes too, so that cop is he's paying himself in a sense.
Absolutely right. It used to drive me crazy. My wife was a school teacher, and we'd go to these parties for teachers, and they bitch about their property taxes. The next sentence out of their mouth was they wanted a pay raise. Don't you see something inconsistent about that?
They're not making the connection, because I think, just in general, I think we should go back to teaching like just basic civics and economics in high school.
I agree. Marshall, you have your question.
I think he's on the phone.
He's on the phone now.
I think Anson was going to say something.
Go ahead, Anson.
No, I was too busy writing you a message, Alan. You can read it. I'm not going to raise the point publicly. Let me ask this question. If we added up all of the income, which it would be probably, wealth tax, income each year for each individual, and didn't have a single loophole, would we be able to create, in other words, the billionaire has, no loopholes. He gets his $14 million a year salary as a CEO. He does all of his stock trading, and he has profit. He sells stuff for a profit, etc. We just added up all that income, figured out what percentage, and everybody pays the same percentage with a threshold that if you don't make up to, say, $100,000 a year, you don't pay any tax at all. Would we be able to resolve the national debt?
Daryl, you want to take a shot at that?
I would say no, because I don't think there's enough income, even if you add up. I don't think there's enough. I think it's complicated.
No. So it's got to be called to survive.
We'll get some money tonight, though. We'll get some money.
Give me some dollars.
And once it gets on the ballot, I don't want you guys to be the haters. Just change your mind. Watch.
You want replays on or off on it?
What do you think?
I guess off. Okay.
It doesn't matter if it's on or off because it's going to stream live on the YouTube to a much larger audience.
Okay.
I'd like to welcome the Congressman. Before he says any words, I want to just say that it's an honor to be able to come here tonight in front of the great state of Illinois and the great state of Clubhouse and talk about John Kitover for Congress, the one man running for Congress that wants to tell the truth about the $37 trillion worth of debt and the $100 trillion of unfunded liabilities. After tonight, we are going to raise enough money to be able to fund the people that are going to be on the street getting signatures, gathering names, petitioning participating in the democratic process to get his name on the ballot. If you believe in democracy, then you believe in John Kitover.
So I believe in people not saying Illinois. It's Illinois. The S is silent. Illinois.
Say Parmesan.
You Illinois.
Hey, do they still?
That was good.
Do people still show up to these town hall things? Because I see in the hallway a town hall, and I don't see everybody in Clubhouse in that town hall the way everybody used to go on those town halls. Is that like everybody's? What's going on with that?
Yeah, nobody needs to go to the town hall. They got recordings of it. You can listen to it later.
Oh.
Look, welcome. Dr. Jordan's here. Dr. Jordan, this is the official money bomb for John Kitover for Congress. So we're going to be posting a link here soon that will allow people to donate. And those of you, listen, if you don't have any money, we're going to make it. We're going to reach you where you are. All we ask is a minimum of $3.50, just $3.50. If you can come up with $3.50, you can donate to John Kitover, and it will be money well spent. Because what he's going to do when he gets to Congress is fight for less government spending, so you can keep more of your money, and the government won't have to waste it. John, do you have any words for anybody?
Yeah, Mojo, thanks so much for helping me organize this. I got the Antidote account set up, which is the fundraising platform, basically a credit card processor and a landing page creator. So if you want to be involved in this campaign, I would love for you to be. I need your help. I need your money, and I will be totally transparent and show you everything we are doing. So far today, we have raised $110, and we've already posted 3 ads in the 3 major towns in the district. That's Rockford, Peoria, and Bloomington Normal. We've posted in the marketing and in the government portions on Craigslist to find Republicans or politically interested consultants to help join the campaign. They'll be doing door knocking, getting signatures on ballots for the March primary. They'll also be at grocery stores and creating content on behalf of the campaign. And you know what? They're probably going to end up joining some of these clubhouse rooms, because I'm going to force any campaign coordinator or consultant to join the clubhouse rooms to get their work done, or to be involved on some of these conference calls. So I'm going to pin the link to the top of the room. If you do want to contribute to the campaign, I would love for you to do so. I will be your friend for life, and I need your help, because part of this is a communication campaign, and your money will be used to basically spam out our messaging to all the potential voters in the 16th district, as well as across the Ethernet and America. So this is really a giant marketing communication operation. Your money is needed. Your thoughts are needed. Your voices are needed, but I'm also going to accumulate your voices regardless. I love you all, and I hope you will join me on this journey as we try to defeat Darren LaHood in the 16th District of Illinois.
Wow, that was powerful. So I think the way we'll do it is, now that we've got it posted up, we will talk about how much money we've raised every hour. We'll do it like this telethon style. If anybody wants to, announce their donation plans, that would be great. But yeah, just like Jerry's kids, we're going to be raising money, and this telethon's going to go all fucking night. We're going to be raising money for John Kitover, because we're fed up. We're fed up with the government spending your money. $37 trillion. Did you know that if you were to stack $100 bills on top of each other, it would be a pile 25,000 miles high? That's $37 trillion. I just wanted you guys to understand that, and that is what John Kitover is fighting for. So if you believe that the government is spending too much money, that the government is borrowing too much money, you might want to join John Kitover for Congress. And the way that you can support me is you can click that link above, and you can reach into your pockets and you can make a generous donation. Go ahead, Tyler.
Yeah, but Jerry Lewis had a lot of performance comp, and I don't know, maybe Nye can sing a tune, maybe Dr. Jordan can sing a tune. There needs to be some entertainment besides you and your humorous self.
Oh, we will definitely have entertainment. I might take Brad in here, who can yell at people. He was doing that, a very good job of that earlier today. It was classic Clubhouse with Brad. We'll get him in here. He'll be yelling at somebody.
maybe you can do some poetry, maybe. JB.
How about for every woman that Brad cusses out on this stage tonight, I will donate $10. $10 to the John Kitover for Congress.
I'll put in for that, yeah.
Yep, there we go.
Also, if you don't like me and you don't want to donate any money to the campaign, that's okay, but we still need your likes, your retweets. Post this Clubhouse room to your X account. Send it to all your friends on Instagram. I know many of you have large social media followings. We need your help to essentially distribute this global message of stop borrowing, stop spending.
If you're gonna have stop racism today, you might have a little bit more support.
So what is your goal?
Racism, oh my god.
What is your goal to do this stop spending? Besides telling us this.
Sorry, Colsey, can you maybe form a more coherent sentence?
What is the way you're going to encourage stop spending besides telling us that? What are your moves or what are your steps to stop the spending?
Sure. So I looked up what Darren LaHood, who I'm running against in the 16th district, has ever said on his social media profiles about lowering your property taxes or your income taxes. He is he doesn't say anything about it. He's not interested in your property taxes or your income taxes. He's a can kicker. That's what I like to label him, as a can kicker. He keeps kicking the debt down the road. In his 10 years as being a congressman, he has created $20 trillion in debt. $20 trillion. It's $2 trillion a year for every year that he's in office. 10 years is enough. We need somebody who's willing to crush the cans, recycle them, and stop just kicking the can. Vote no on HRX. Lower the NDAA by, let's say, $400 billion. Lower Medicare, Medicaid by, say, $400 billion. Let's start cutting now. Let's stop borrowing. Let's stop spending.
You can't finance your campaign besides rooms like this.
I have a question, John. When it comes to, because I work in Medicare and I work in Medicaid, I work with seniors. When it comes to healthcare and primary care, when it comes to Medicaid and Medicare, what do you mean by cuts? Do you mean, what do you mean by cuts?
Well, in Medicare and Medicaid, there's $100 billion worth of fraud a year. $100 billion worth of fraud every year. Over 20 years, that's $2 trillion worth of fraud. So I think cutting Medicare and Medicaid by $100 billion immediately and letting the medical industrial complex, recapture that profit from the loss of that $100 billion budget, that's one way to get started.
Okay, because when it comes to Medicare, yes, there is a lot of fraud, of course. So when it comes to Medicare and cutting the cost of Medicare, I don't think you need cutting the cost of Medicare. I think you need adding more regulation to the Medicare process, because what I see a lot is primary care doctors charging procedures that are not even done, getting money and premiums from these seniors. Charging for medications, referrals, procedures that aren't done. So what do you mean by cuts? Because that's where I get confused when people say cuts or regulation on what's being done with these primaries and these insurance companies.
Yeah, I mean, lowering the annual budgetary expense by a minimum of $100 billion a year to start.
But how would that stop the fraud? That's where I'm getting at. How would that stop the fraud? Because it wouldn't. It would just leave more room for fraudulent activities and less money for people who actually need it. So that's where I feel like when people use the word cut in Medicare, it's like almost what do you call that? Where it's shock factor, shock value, where, you don't even know what you're talking about when it comes to cutting the funding. You need regulations. So you low-key need more funding in Medicare and Medicaid.
No, what I'm saying is,
allocate for that fraud.
Pockets, what I'm saying is, if we immediately lower it by $100 billion, guess what? That's $100 billion less of fraud a year.
No, that's not how fraud works. The fraud is what is getting us into the negatives when it comes to the funding of Medicare. It doesn't matter if you cut $100 billion. These frauds are still going to be taking that $100 billion. It doesn't matter if we cut it or not. These people who are doing these actions are still going to do it, John. So that's where I want to know, what are you going to do when it comes to
Well, let's say,
fraud?
say if 100 billion out of 2 billion is a percentage, well then that percentage less is of fraud. So I understand what you're saying, Pockets. I'm being facetious in saying that we can't keep borrowing 2 trillion a year and only collect 5 trillion a year in tax revenue. How do you suggest we deal with that annual deficit, Pockets?
The regulation on fraud. That's where I get really upset with that. People want to cut funding, but they don't want to regulate the fraudulent activities. They don't want to put people into these positions to regulate the fraud that's happening. Man, I don't think people remember when I don't know if it was Trump, somebody in the Republican Party wanted to make it public access for what you're being charged with, or the access charges and your medical bills. People wanted to make that public. I know that. I think Congress, whether it was the House or the Senate, someone denied that. But I feel like we need to get to that point to where people are actually seeing what they're being charged with. They're seeing these access charges, which is ridiculous what these seniors are being charged with in the medical field. So I feel like cutting funding in Medicare, it should be hard. I don't know how cutting funding is going to help the fraud situation. That doesn't make sense.
No, I agree. Listen, there's
Here is the solution that a politician like John is not going to tell you. You need to raise taxes and cut spending. You need to do both of them. Democrats are going to propose to raise taxes and not cut any fucking spending. Republicans are going to throw a hissy fit in the